Live Well, Maintaining Wellbeing During the Winter Months, presented by Suzanne Roberts of the Macular Society on the 11th of January 2024. About Live Well. Live Well is a series of events aimed at helping people make the most of life with sight loss. Live Well is a collaborative project between 6 local independent sight societies. Sight Advice South Lakes, Cumbria, My Sight, Nottingham, Sight Airedale, the Airedale area, North and West Yorkshire, Support for Sight, Mid and West Essex, Sutton Vision, the London Borough of Sutton, and Outlookers, Huddersfield, West Yorkshire.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Tim Ward. I work for Sight Advice South Lakes, and we're part of a group of small local organisations of sight loss around the country. We do Zooms twice a month. This Zoom is called Living Well, and it's about people's mental well-being in the main, and other things as well, and the Macular Society. It's Suzanne Roberts, who's the head of counselling at the Macular Society, who's going to talk about the Macular Society and also some tips on how to sort of live well and feel good in these dark winter months. So I'm going to pass over to Suzanne, who will introduce herself again, I'm sure.
So my name's Suzanne Roberts. I head up the counselling service for the Macular Society, and thank you for inviting me here today. And the purpose of the talk really is to tell you a bit about the Macular Society and the counselling service. So anybody that has macular disease who feels they would benefit from emotional support can make a referral, but also to sort of touch on how we sort of cope generally with or without a visual impairment, and to leave time for us to be able to share tips and coping mechanisms. Because I think that sometimes when you're listening to a Zoom, often there isn't enough time to be able to learn from one another. And I think there's a lot of benefit in sharing what we do and sort of how we cope. So if I think about sort of the counselling service as a whole, which has been running for 20 odd years now, and it was developed because we all know there's very sort of limited services for people who have a visual impairment and need emotional support. So that's how sort of the society, that's how the counselling service began. And in terms of themes and who comes through to us, mainly it's people who are either newly diagnosed or those where there's been a change in their vision. And of course, there will be people where the sight loss has reached a level where it's really impacting on that person's life. So there's different stages that people will come through to us at the Macular Society. And the general themes that people will bring to us is naturally a fear of losing vision, so a fear of going blind. I think that's possibly the number one theme that people will bring to us. And then there's a fear around losing independence, adapting to a new life. And also it's around sort of, we all envisage how our life will be. You know, if you think about before having a diagnosis, no doubt you would have envisaged what the next 5 years, 10 years, etc. would be for you. And I think we all do this. And then when a diagnosis comes along, particularly with sight loss, you know, everything does change. And that doesn't mean that, you know, there isn't a life, because of course there is, but it's a new life and it's around adapting. So that's what we will support people with, that kind of adaptation. And as you will know, if you have a vision impairment, there's constant adaptation because there will be, you know, regular dips in vision or changes. So we have a number of groups that we offer. And one of them is for people who experience the Charles Bonnet syndrome. I imagine you are all familiar with this, but just in case, and if you want me to speak more about it later, I will. So experiencing a visual hallucination is seeing something that isn't actually there. But with sight loss and any form of eye disease, we are more prone to experiencing visual hallucinations. So it doesn't have to be macular disease, it can be any form of eye disease or injury to the eye. And particularly around this time of year, the referrals regarding the Charles Bonnet syndrome go up. And we think that's to do with the lighting. So the group that we offer for people experiencing the visual hallucinations is on the telephone. And it's around sort of sharing experiences, because quite often people can feel quite alone in dealing with these hallucinations, and also learning coping strategies. The other two groups that we offer, one is a Zoom group, and all of the groups are time limited, so for like 6 sessions. The other group is a Zoom group for people who are in paid or unpaid employment. So, and this group is for basically supporting people in the workplace. Again, they need to have macular disease, but it could be that it's been a very difficult journey to get into the workplace, dealing with the stigma associated with sight loss whilst you're working, and also the challenges that perhaps somebody with a disability would have as opposed to somebody without. And we've had really great feedback from this group, because the group themselves, I think, have really benefited from being able to speak to others in a similar situation, and have not felt that they've just had to kind of get on with it and not say anything. And these particular groups have gone on to have their own WhatsApp group. So not only have they had sort of the 6 sessions together, they've then formed their own peer support group, which has been fantastic. So the support continues. It doesn't end after the 6 sessions. And we're also going to pilot a group for people who support others with macular disease. So we know that there's lots of people out there who will be supporting others with a visual impairment. I can see even, today that sometimes there's 2 of you, not one of you. So I imagine one of you will support each other in different ways, but that one of you has a visual impairment and the other one doesn't. And of course, dynamics change within relationships in this situation. Lots of things will change within home, and I imagine just within the relationship in general. And we want to be able to support the other person as well as the person with the visual impairment. What tends to happen when we have had referrals from the person supporting and we offer them sessions, they will often say, well, this isn't about me, it's my partner or my husband or my wife or whoever that has the condition. I don't need this support. So they tend to overlook themselves, and we don't want to do that. We want to provide a service for those that are supporting others. So that's something new and something for you to kind of bear in mind. And we have our peer support groups that run throughout the country for people of a working age and for people who are retired or not working. So there's over 300 groups that run throughout the country. So if anyone who has macular disease that would like to access a local group, then you can always contact our helpline. And then, like with other local sight loss services, we offer other services such as technical support and condition-specific groups. And if anybody listening would like to make a referral, you can call our helpline. If you remind me, I'll give you that number at the end. Or you can make an online referral, but it's very easy to phone up and to just say you'd like to make a referral, or to just be able to talk through whatever it is that's concerning you with our helpline, because they're fantastic and they can help you sort of decide what sort of support you need. Because I think sometimes people come through to us, like with any service and like with any of us, you don't quite know what you need, or you don't quite know what's on offer. But sometimes being able to talk that through can really help. And the same can be said for the counselling service. When you come through to the counselling service, you're often assessment. And during that assessment, it gives that person time to sort of talk through their diagnosis, what, how they're feeling, the impact, their fears. And sometimes that might lead to more sessions. Sometimes that's enough for that person. Because how often do any of us have sort of an hour to talk to someone who's actually listening to what we're saying and thinking about what we need? It's a rarity, isn't it? And if it's not counselling, it might be befriending, where somebody just might want to chat to a trained volunteer rather than structured sessions. So if I sort of go on to now and the winter months, I know our referrals for the Macular Society have certainly increased, and especially in January, for some reason, we've been inundated. And there's a number of reasons, and we can only kind of guess. But definitely the light changing, I think, makes a big difference when you have a visual impairment. So the light changing for many people makes it more difficult to see. Some people will find that there'll be a particular time of day when they can see better. Obviously, the days are shorter. We tend to spend more time inside and perhaps exercise less. We might see less people that we normally meet up with. And I was going to say definitely less sunlight, although today seems to be possibly the sunniest day I've seen since Christmas. But often there can be a vitamin D deficiency because of the lack of sunlight. So what can we sort of do, or what can you do if you have a visual impairment? Definitely think about the tint that you have on your glasses, because I know there are many people that will have a number of pairs of glasses. And I realise that sometimes they can be expensive if they're the glasses that you've got from the optician, these sort of the ones that block out the blue light, etc. Some people use very good tinted sunglasses, but I know from a very good friend of mine, he has glasses of all different shades and colours, and when we go out, he will swap and change them depending on the lighting. And you'll know that if you're outside and then you go into a shop, or that you then inside a shop and then you come out, the lighting can be blinding. So I think just really bear in mind that perhaps changing the colour or the type of tint can make a difference, not only in the summer but also in the winter. And then think about, when is the sort of optimum time, for you to go out. I speak to lots of people who they're going out less, and that might be, because it gets dark earlier, or because it's particularly frosty early in the morning. For some people, it might be that the shops are a lot busier at a certain time and they want to be able to avoid that. So you think about what works for you. So rather than sort of shut yourself away, think about, if I am going to go out and I'm going to go out just for 10 minutes or so, when's the best time for me to do that? When will I feel most comfortable? Because we know it's really important for us to get outside and to sort of experience the fresh air, perhaps listen to the birds. I walked the dog earlier and I've never heard so many woodpeckers ever, which was really lovely whilst walking around the woods. But
Oh,
it
I
might
don't know.
it might be that if you've got a garden, it's literally just a little walk around the garden, and it might feel like a real effort to get all wrapped up and do it, but it can make a difference. And just think that when we're not doing the things that we normally do, our confidence levels can drop because we're not sort of putting things into practice, be that socially and also kind of being out and about. So you may have found this during COVID, and we certainly saw it with the counselling service, that where people were not going out as much, confidence levels dropped because you're not practicing doing that route or practicing going into the shops or some of the challenges that you may have faced. And when we don't practice things, we can become more sort of fearful of doing it again. Because for some people, it's a real big effort to get out and about. So I think try and practice during the winter, even if it's short trips or short journeys. Keep up that kind of building up your level of confidence. Now, loneliness, and I know this doesn't apply to everyone. I can think of recently speaking to a lady about loneliness, and she said to me, I am alone, but I'm not lonely. And I think, that's a good point. And some people are comfortable in their own company, and others like to have some kind of interaction. And if you think about the winter, particularly if you live on your own, you are likely to see less people as we all spend more time inside. So it's really important that if you can, to try and sort of, if you think you're somebody that does struggle with having too much time on your own, is to think about what is there that's available to you locally. Or if you are fortunate enough to live with somebody, what is it that you could sort of do more of that perhaps you've stopped doing during the winter? You'd be amazed at the clients that we work with, and sometimes it's simple things that perhaps maybe somebody stopped going to the cafe for a cup of coffee, or they've stopped going for lunch with friends, and then they've really got out of the habit of doing it. Sometimes it's a case of reminding yourself what you used to do, and you might not do it as much, but maybe just consider doing it every now and again. There are also helplines available. I know people who have linked up and perhaps got a telephone buddy. A number of sight loss services will have telephone buddies. I think Age UK have a befriending service, and also Silverline offer a helpline where you can call and have a 15-minute conversation. So there are things out there, and sometimes I think people feel like, oh, you have to make such an effort to find out about them. And I agree that sometimes that does happen, and it shouldn't be the case. But hopefully, we can talk more about that. If you want to know more about helplines or telephone buddies, and the Macular Society have a befriending service as well. Just think, little things can make a big difference. And also, friends. Is there a friend that you could link up with, or perhaps somebody that you haven't seen for a long time? Could you sort of pick up the phone and make that connection? Sometimes I think we can hang around and wait for people to call us when actually we need to make the phone call. So next slide is about sort of listening to our bodies. And it might seem quite basic, but I think we can all be sort of guilty of not doing this at times. But if you think about over the years, how many times all of us on this call would have had a cough or a cold. We know this, we know the symptoms, don't we? We know that when we get that sort of itchy throat, or we start to feel really tired, or we've got a headache, often you'll hear people say, I think I'm coming down with something. So we're in tune with our body then. We listen, we know that something is possibly going to happen. We're going to get a cold, or we're going to start to feel a bit sort of rubbishy, basically. And we might then take action. I'm thinking of very cliche things in terms of, hot water, lemon, ginger, and people, top up on vitamins, etc. So try and think about this in terms of your mental health. So there will be the same kind of triggers in a way, but they'll be different. So it might be that you possibly realize that your sleep is disrupted, or that you feel particularly stressed. I'll go on to sort of more about the symptoms of anxiety and depression, but it's kind of noting that something's not quite right within you. And to then think, right, well, what do I need to do? How can I listen to my body in the same way that I would when a cough or a cold is developing? How can I do the same for my mental health? So there was a lot around COVID time around sort of self-care. And I just think it's just really important generally. So it's about being kinder to yourself. And if you are feeling that, it's really difficult, sort of the winter months, and it's really quite a sort of stressful, lonely time, think about what you do with your time. I know there are people that will be really limited, perhaps because of vision, or perhaps because of mobility and all other things that life throws at us. But it's just thinking about, are there things that you want to do more of? Are there things that you do and actually you want to do less of it? So try and really think about how you're spending your day. And then what is it that kind of makes you feel better? What is it that boosts your mood? So, for example, I know that when I cook, even though I might think, oh, this is a real interruption to my day because I'm going to cook dinner, I know that I actually feel quite relaxed if I'm cooking something. Not everybody, may be able to do that, but it could also be music. Sometimes I'll put on some music that's really fun, just really easy to listen to. And other times it might be, I might listen to an audio book, generally whilst I'm doing something else, admittedly. But it's just thinking about what is it that works for you and makes you feel just that little bit better. It could be something really simple, like a particular aftershave, or it could be a perfume, or, a scent that means something to you. So, and then diet. We all know having a good, healthy diet is very important to us, but particularly, I think, in the winter, and particularly whilst we're trying to look after ourselves, and also keeping hydrated, making sure that you drink. If you don't like drinking water, can you have diluted juice beside you? And I know probably many people on this call would have been told the same thing, but if you've ever seen the consequences of being dehydrated, it can have a massive impact on your body. So it's basically taking time out when you need to. So I'm going to just sort of cover, we are going to talk as a group, so you won't be listening to me all the time, but sort of common symptoms of anxiety, stress, and low mood. And if you want me to say more about it later, I will. But basically things around sort of losing motivation. Perhaps for many people, it's feeling irritated or realizing that your level of tolerance has dipped. So if you're the kind of person that could normally fairly easygoing and lots of things, can go over your head, and suddenly you find that you can't do that as much, or little things are really bothering you. Again, that could be a sign that you're particularly distressed. Other symptoms: feeling overwhelmed, not being able to concentrate like you once did. And maybe we can all relate to that sort of sense of dread, or that feeling, that tightness in your stomach, if you're feeling particularly anxious or low. Many of us on this call are part of a bigger, wider family. So sometimes it's not necessarily something that's happening directly to us. It could be something that's going on, in a family member's life. I spoke to somebody yesterday who was really struggling with hallucinations, which can get worse with stress and anxiety. We've seen it a number of times. She also has very poor vision, poor mobility, but there was a situation in her family where there was a divorce, and she was particularly worried about her daughter. So a lot of these things, we think it can be just about one person, and often we're taking on sort of the worries of other people, be it our friends, be it family members, etc. Nobody comes to us at the Macular Society just with macular disease, because we all live lives. The other thing that might sort of tell you that you're not quite 100% is sort of feeling more sensitive than you normally would. And that can be that, something's been said and perhaps you've really taken it to heart, or you feel that you're overreacting to things that perhaps you could have just let go of in the past. So managing our emotions, it is a life skill, isn't it? And I think they're teaching more of it at school these days than ever before. Because I think if we go back to probably when my dad was at school, that wouldn't have been something that would have been given any consideration. It would have been that you just get on with it. And there's a lot of people that we speak to who have that kind of mentality that you have to just get on with it. But some people will find that easier than others. And to bear in mind that we all come from different backgrounds and different starting places and different levels of resilience. And some of us may have been able to put coping strategies in place that are really helpful. But then there can be times when we will do things that are perhaps not helpful, but we don't realise at the time, such as we might withdraw and decide we don't want to speak to anyone. I speak to many people who will say, I don't feel like going out, or I haven't been out for weeks on end. And these would be people that could go out, but withdrawing socially, sometimes relying on alcohol as a pick-me-up, or refusing help when perhaps it could be really supportive. Some people might find that they eat too much, or more often they don't eat enough. And basically, I think it can be around just neglecting oneself because of being in a place where perhaps your mood is so low that for some people they almost run out of energy to be able to do something different. And that's where perhaps speaking to somebody else or being linked to the counselling service can really help, because you've got somebody independent and somebody who can perhaps even encourage you to make a drink and have a shower, which could lead on to you feeling slightly better. It's all about small steps in this situation, and think about what helps you and what hinders you, and try not to think about it in terms of it has to be huge. So often people will say, I need to, I don't know, tidy up the whole of my house or go through everything in case I need to move out, rather than think about just tidying one drawer at a time. So try and think about achievable goals if you feel you are sort of in a place where you're struggling. So we'll stop in a bit where we can talk to one another. But in terms of getting support, who is a good person for you to reach out to? And I know that if you're feeling quite down, for so many people, it can be hard to reach out for help, particularly if you're the kind of person that everybody tends to come to you. Bit of a generalization, but if you are the person that supports others, it can be hard to say, actually, you know, I'm having a little bit of a wobble here. But try to think of it as sort of a start of a conversation, and not that you're trying to kind of solve the whole of the problem, because again, little steps can make a big difference. And I've just mentioned here about the sort of cost of living, and you know, there may be people that have got worries that are linked to things, the very practical things such as heating and sort of just managing day to day financially. And again, there are support available. I was thinking particularly, I don't know, RNIB, but local support services, and maybe sort of consider benefits that perhaps you are eligible for, such as PIP or attendance allowance, which can often make the difference between, you know, not going somewhere to going somewhere because you've got a bit of extra money and you can get a taxi. Or somebody said to me the other day that she could really do with a cleaner, and that if she got the attendance allowance, that's what she'd use it for, because it would make her life easier and she would feel happier knowing that the home was cleaner. And it's what works for us as individuals. So you may find, you know, that you've got a friend that's a particularly good friend. You know, I've got a friend, and whenever we meet up, we always say that we're a tonic for one another, because you always tend to laugh a lot. So think about if you've got somebody that, you know, is a really good friend to you. And then community, joining a like-minded group, and it might not be a sight loss group like today. It might be another type of group that's available locally, be it a walking group or
U3A.
U3. Did somebody say U3A? That's what I was thinking of if somebody said that, but it just came into my mind. But yeah, think about groups of, you know, like-minded people. And then I've got a little picture on the screen here of looks like 4 dice with the word plan, PLAN, on letter on each dice. And really it's just to say about taking action. So when we find ourselves in a situation where we're in a bit of a pickle basically, and we think, you know, we don't feel as good, we need to do something about it. Because if we don't do anything about it, absolutely nothing changes. You know, we can all be experts on our situation and think, well, I completely understand it and I know what I'm up against and this is it. But sometimes it's about doing something about it. Some of the things that I've mentioned. And then I always cover this little analogy about worry. And we all have worries because we're human beings. But try to think about worries sort of being in 2 categories. So we've got worries that we potentially can't do anything about. You know, we can't control whether it's going to rain tomorrow, etc. But there are worries that go through our mind that perhaps, you know, we can do something about them, or we can reduce our stress around them. So think about, if you can't do absolutely anything about it, can you sort of let that one float away? And then the others, can you make a plan and do something rather than nothing? And then I've got a little picture here of somebody that looks like a doctor, but it's supposed to be like a therapist, because I read something in a book and it was basically saying that we need to become, all of us need to sort of get the skills to become our own therapists and give ourselves advice. So it's thinking about what would you prescribe for yourself? Many of you might think, a lovely holiday, but what could you sort of incorporate in your life right now? And I think for us to be able to stop really, and perhaps stop talking in a minute, but to be able to sort of share helpful coping strategies, amongst each other, to think, what do you do if you have a day where you think this is going to be a really difficult day? What is it that people do? Do you just sit there and wait for the day to pass, which some people, if you're feeling particularly depressed, you might do that. Or do you do something about it? So we work with people in trying to get them to do something about it, to get people to sort of be able to live life, with hope, really, and a fulfilled life.
Live Well and Future Vision. We hope you have enjoyed this presentation. Live Well events take place on the second Thursday of each month at 10 a.m. Future Vision sessions take place on the fourth Thursday of each month at 10 a.m. and a technology event aimed at people living with sight loss. To attend the next session or to suggest future topics, please contact your local sight society, who will be able to provide you with the Zoom link.